in this time of the pandemic. May we desire to find ways to excel in our work in the spirit of galing science. May we remain steadfast in faith as we encourage each other towards excellence and resilience per scientiam ad dominum. May we serve as catalysts for the advancement in all areas of our lives. We ask this through our Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you, Father Regent. We now sing the Philippine National Anthem. Good morning, everyone. I am Felipe Jose Hernandez of the University of Santo Tomas Communications Bureau, and I will be your moderator for the opening ceremonies of the Modified Enhanced Online Week of Science 2.0, or our MEOWS 2.0. As we prepare for a smooth and orderly conduct of our opening ceremonies, let us go over some of our webinar house rules. First, We'd like to request you to refrain from sharing the link to this virtual room. Don't worry, as our Facebook page is also airing our proceedings live. Please note as well that your microphones will be muted during the learning session. However, you may continue to interact with us through the use of our chat box. We will also be entertaining your questions in the open forum. The sources of our questions will not just be our Zoom meeting, but also the comments on Facebook Live. But again, we'd like to ask you to refrain from using our chat box for personal socialization. We also have some more tips on how we can maximize our learning this morning through these 3 tips on webinar decorum. We hope that you will have a worthwhile experience for this morning. And at this point, I have the honor of calling on the Dean of the University of Santo Tomas College of Science, Professor Ray Don S. Papa, PhD, for his opening remarks.
Okay. Um, the Honorable Fortunato de la Peña, Secretary of the Department of Science and Technology, Professor Jonathan Lunin of Cornell University, Reverend Father Louis R. Coronel, OP, Regent of the College of Science, fellow administrators, faculty members, students, support staff, alumni, and guests. A pleasant morning to you all. It has been a year since the world has been first put on lockdown to help control the spread of the pandemic. The education sector has been one of the worst affected by the lockdown, with classes shifting to emergency remote teaching and learning strategies. In the College of Science, faculty members and students had to adapt to the new normal of the educational landscape or risk not being able to continue training tomorrow's Filipino scientists. Scientists who, as we see more clearly now, play a vital role in bringing forth solutions to the many to many of the world's most pressing problems. The breakneck speed at which vaccines have been developed is a testament to how scientists have responded to the call to bring this pandemic to an end. 2 days ago, the United Kingdom launched their celebrations for this year's British Science Week. And one of their honorees for this year is Professor Sarah Gilbert of Oxford University, who played a pivotal role in developing the Oxford Astrazeneca vaccine. Professor Gilbert is but one of the many science heroes who we look up to and is proof of how scientists can put a stop to the pandemic by developing vaccines that can work against it. The work that her team, as well as those of other groups who have developed vaccines, technologies, inventions, mathematical models, and other potential solutions to end this pandemic are proof of the timeliness of our theme for this year. Science works, securing the future with science. The UST College of Science community, its faculty members, students, support staff, and alumni are living testaments to the resilience, hard work, imaginativeness, determination, and adaptability of Thamasian scientists. Not only has the college pioneered the conduct of online College Week celebrations through the modified enhanced online Week of Science, which we first held last July 6 to 10, 2020, but our faculty members and students, particularly its researchers, have made sure that they use their time in lockdown to prepare research proposals, analyze data, write and submit manuscripts for publications, and once they had been allowed to go back to the laboratories, started working on experiments they had left behind when the ECQ was declared in the Philippines. Our researchers have also tried working on finding out ways by which to contribute to the fight against the SARS-CoV-2 virus and the COVID-19 pandemic. The psychologists of the college were the first in the front lines, with the Thamasian mental health responders, a group of psychologists from the UST Department of Psychology, including our alumni and graduate students from the UST Graduate School, who have helped our frontliners, COVID patients, and their families cope with the stress, anxiety, and trauma during the darkest days of the ECQ. Associate Professor Bernhard Egwolf and Reverend Father Nicanor Austriaco came up with the UST COVID-2 model, which was a mobility-guided modeling of the pandemic in Metro Manila and had been published in the Philippine Journal of Science by October 2020. This model likewise launched their involvement with the Octa research group. Meanwhile, Professor Alan Macabeo's laboratory conducted in silico analysis of antiviral secondary metabolites against SARS-CoV-2. I am equally proud that follow-up research that they have conducted after the initial publication in the Journal of Biomolecular Structure and Dynamics included not only graduate students and alumni of the college, but current undergraduate students from our medical biology program. Our industrial biology students, under the tutelage of Reverend Father Austriaco, helped establish the UST COVAX awareness team, whose main goal is to help understand Filipino sentiments about vaccines and help raise awareness on the need to get vaccinated to end this pandemic. Lastly, Professor Pia Albano and her research group are also trying to work on a seroprevalence study in the university, which will be helpful as we ease back into the new normal in campus, hopefully in the foreseeable future. These are just some of the innovative ways by which members of the UST College of Science community have proven how the future can be secured with science. What I am most proud of is the fact that these initiatives have been developed through an intense spirit of volunteerism, willingness, and ingenuity among members of our community. No one had been coerced into working on these research and extension activities, and still we saw how the best ideas came about because these Thamasian scientists brought interesting ideas to life through their talent and hard work. This is despite the fact that none of them worked on pandemic or antiviral research in the past, much like Professor Gilbert of Oxford, whose entry into vaccinology came about by looking at plasmodium genetics, but is now one of the leading scientists in our fight against the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Our celebrations this year are extra special as we formally launch the 5-year countdown to the Centennial Celebrations of the UST College of Science, which was founded in 1926. We opened this 5-year countdown with the inaugural Albertus Magnus Faith and Science Lectures in honor of our patron saint, a Dominican, bishop, professor, and scientist. This year, we are honored that renowned Cornell astronomist and Vice President of the Society of Catholic Scientists, Professor Jonathan Lunin, has agreed to deliver the inaugural lecture. This lecture, which will be held annually from this point onwards, will highlight the importance of appreciating the common bonds between faith and science, a role which the UST College of Science, from the Pontifical and Royal Catholic University of the Philippines, is envisioned to play a bigger role in. Apart from this lecture, we will also launch a logo and theme making contest this week. We hope that the theme and logo will capture the essence and importance of our centennial celebrations come 2026 and inspire everyone to continue living the Galing Science motto of the college as we prepare for its 100th year of existence. To end, I would like to thank the brilliant and hardworking team behind this year's modified enhanced online week of science. Drs. Alan Rodel Salcedo and Karen Katrina Trinidad had done a wonderful task of shepherding and the organizing committee behind this first and the second MEOWS of the college. It is them who put in the most difficult tasks of making sure that what started out as a crazy idea last year has turned into a successful celebration of our college week. Not once, but twice. May we all have a fruitful and enjoyable MEOWS ahead. With faith and science, we will see an end to this pandemic. Thank you and good morning.
Thank you very much, Dean Papa. As we introduced during this event, the inaugural Albertus Magnus Faith and Science Lecture, we are also fortunate to hear a message from the President of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, Professor Joachim von Braun.
Dear Professor Ray, dear colleagues, and dear students, I congratulate you to the Centennial Celebrations of your College of Science at University of Santo Tomas, the Philippines. You appropriately celebrate with Albertus Magnus Faith and Science Lectures. The great teacher Albertus Magnus lived and is buried in the city of Cologne, nearby from where I'm speaking to you. I'm Joachim von Braun, the President of the Pontifical Academy of Science in the Vatican. Dear colleagues, advances in science are essential to achieve progress in human development and to protect nature. But science must constantly earn the trust of society. The importance and relevance of evidence-based insights and solutions must be effectively demonstrated. We note that freedom of thought is fundamental for societal well-being, and freedom of science is fundamental for science to identify new truths and facilitate progress with responsibility. Scientist communities need to actively engage in shaping and promoting evidence-based worldviews. In doing so, we see synergies between free and responsible science and religion. Religion harvests the collective experience of populations about rules of moral conduct. Science and religion are complementary. Dear colleagues, dear Professor, science and religion are complementary. Dear colleagues, I wish you wonderful celebrations and my best wishes for your future. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Dean Papa and Professor Joachim von Braun. At this point in time, we will hear from our keynote speaker. Our keynote speaker started his professional career at the then Esso Standard Eastern as a cost and operations engineer in 1969, the same year when he earned his bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from the University of the Philippines. He then took up graduate studies in industrial engineering at the same university and earned a master's degree in the field. He joined the UP College of Engineering faculty as an instructor in 1973 and rose to become full professor in 1988. He served the University of the Philippines in various capacities as chairman of the Department of Industrial Engineering and Operations Research, as assistant to the executive director of the National Engineering Center, as director of the Institute for Small-Scale Industries, and assistant vice president for planning and development. He taught industrial engineering and operations research at UP for 43 years, from 1973 to 2016. He was seconded to the National Science and Technology Authority, which later became the Department of Science and Technology, 3 times, as head of its planning service, as director of its Technology Application and Promotion Institute, and as Undersecretary for Scientific and Technical Services, after which he retired in 2014. In 2016, he was appointed as the DOST Secretary. He led a number of professional organizations as its president. These are the Philippine Institute of Chemical Engineers, the Association of Management and Industrial Engineers of the Philippines, the National Research Council of the Philippines, and the Philippine Association for the Advancement of Science and Technology. He also served as chair of the UN Commission on Science and Technology for Development. The awards he received include the Dangal ng Bayan Award from the Civil Service Commission, the Outstanding Career Executive Officer Award from the Career Executive Service Board, the Outstanding Professional Award from the Professional Regulations Commission, the UP Alumni Association Award for Public Service, the UP Alumni Engineers Most Distinguished Alumnus Award, the UP Alumni Association Lifetime Distinguished Achievement Award, and the Ateneo Government Service Award. The University of the Philippines, his alma mater, conferred on him the degree Doctor of Laws honoris causa in 2018. My dear friends from the Galing Science community, our keynote speaker, the Honorable Fortunato de la Peña.
Okay na. Warmest greetings to everyone. I'm very pleased and honored to be with you today on this very important event. I will just call it MEOWS 2021 or the modified online science innovation celebration. Special greetings to Father Louis Coronel, who heads the university, to Professor Joachim von Braun of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, to Professor Jonathan Lunin of Cornell University, and Dean Ray Papa, as well as all our resource persons and participants today. I am sharing with you a presentation consisting of about 15 slides entitled Securing a Sustainable and Inclusive Future with Science. Next slide, please. I have before us here a statement about the Department of Science and Technology as it provides and creates enabling opportunities for others through innovation, opportunities that will allow them to improve their lives towards inclusive growth. I also have a simple statement here about the University of Santo Tomas, guided by reason and illumined by faith, dedicates herself to the generation, advancement, and transmission of knowledge to form competent and compassionate professionals committed to the service of the church, the nation, and the global community. And a subtitle, for my speech, Science for the People is Science with Conscience. Next slide, please. I love looking at history and, of course, looking at the history of science and technology in the Philippines. You will always see the University of Santo Tomas as part of the early years. History tells us of the role of the University of Santo Tomas in shaping the Philippine science and technology community. I don't know how accurate these statements are coming from my mind as I remember them, but I know that the University of Santo Tomas has the richest collection of books in science written in the Philippines during the Spanish colonial period. It has also one of the oldest and biggest collection on natural history in the Philippines. As the oldest university in the Philippines, it was the first to offer degrees in science, pharmacy, and medicine. I remember medicine started in 1871, all during the Spanish period. And I was still searching to find whether there is a Philippine university that offered engineering before 1907. I could not find one, so I just put it here. UP started engineering in 1910. Of course, De La Salle became a college only in, I think, 1909. And UST offered the, it was not called a bachelor's degree, but it was the preparation for the practice of civil engineering in 1907. Now we move on to the present. From the past, next slide will show us a glimpse of the present. So I just picked out again from my memory the present contributions, at least from what I remember during my term as Secretary of the OST, on the contributions of the OST on new technologies, new intellectual property. From medicine and engineering, the development of an insole pressure sensing system with inertial measuring unit for the prevention of foot ulcers in diabetic mellitus. So this is one of the first biomedical devices that we have supported at the OST. Over at engineering, while this one was developed on its own by the Mechanical Engineering Faculty of the University of Santo Tomas, the DOST just came in to produce more prototypes so that it can undergo more trials in more hospitals. And I'm referring to the Logistic Indoor Service Assistant or the LISA robot of the ME department of UST. Next slide, please. There are also breakthroughs from the Faculty of Science, breakthroughs in the development of biosensors, and if I may add, biomarkers, as in the biomarker for gestational diabetes that was also developed at UST and was actually finally, the researcher was a finalist in the US ASEAN Award for Women Scientists. We have many researchers using natural products, and if I may add, we also had the recent research on the synthesis and use of compound derivatives. This was done by Dr. Alan Macabeo. And there are all researches related to energy. And this is shown in the next slide. Next slide, please. From the past, present, we move to the future. And this is just my own limited, shall we say, forecast of the important role that UST will play in research and development in science, technology, innovations, including human resource development. We expect UST to produce a very significant number of master and PhD graduates in science and technology. We expect UST to have many significant contributions in the area of biomedical devices and related technologies. We expect UST to develop more new drugs, therapeutics using Philippine biodiversity. And one of the most recent decisions at the Department of Science and Technology is to help UST establish and operate what we call the Center for Advanced Materials for Clean Energy Technologies based on indigenous materials, or CAMSET. So these are at least my own contribution on what I see UST will be doing in the future in R&D, in S&T, and innovations. I have not even added the many things that I hope the colleagues of the Faculty of Engineering will carry out. Next slide, please. From this recollection about the University of Santo Tomas, let me move on now to my recollection of the development of the first document on the National Innovation Strategy. Way back in 2007, a group of institutions, there were 4, who led in the development of the document, first document on the National Innovation Strategy of the Philippines. And these were the Department of Science and Technology, the Intellectual Property Office of the Philippines, the Asian Institute of Management, and the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry. For 10 years, the Department of Science and Technology led the network that provided the advocacy work on innovation under the name Innovation. When I came in 2016 as Secretary of the Department of Science and Technology, I requested the Department of Trade and Industry to take over the leadership in the advocacy and leadership in running the Philippine Innovation Network, which consists, of course, of both government and private institutions. And that led to what we call the expansion of the network through the whole of government approach. And over here, we can see basic and applied research grants, the commercialization, support to commercialization of R&D results, human resource development, and the balance between automation and labor-intensive activities. We see innovation policy, monitoring, evaluation of implementation of projects. Okay, so we now have a modified way so that we can monitor projects. We can select projects in a better way. Okay, so we now have specific dates when proposals will be submitted. And we promise a certain date when the result of the evaluation will be known and the start of the release of the grants. We have, of course, support innovation and research and development, even at the local government level, at the LGU level, because we need this if we really want inclusive development. We have, of course, the market-oriented research grants and R&D commercialization support. We need this. The only way we can call it real innovation is if it is when it is applied or used productively. Then we have the role of the OST coordinating and linking with industries, academe for innovation. And here I can say that we have been fortunate that more and more government agencies, in particular cabinet level departments, have been contributing their own funds to the implementation of research projects. Originally, it was only the Department of Health, the Department of Agriculture. Now we have the Department of Public Works, we have the Department of Energy, partnering with us, contributing their own funds for research to undertake specific projects. That way, we are also assured that they will use the results because they put in their money. We have, of course, the physical innovations or the infrastructure improvements that we have, not only within the Department of Science and Technology, and I wish I can make one whole presentation on the new facilities that we have, but also in the facilities that are the result of our setting up of what we call NITS research and development centers in the regions. The regions, of course, include the National Capital Region or Metro Manila, and that is the reason why the University of Santo Tomas is having a nicer center, as I have mentioned in our slide for the future. Next slide, please. Here, I am showing now what I would say is already a result of our efforts, the whole of government approach, the whole of nation approach in generating innovations for productive use. And I am referring to the improvement in our ranking in the Global Innovations Index since we started joining. In 2014, we were number 100 in about 120 countries. We moved on to 74, 73, well, 83, and then 74, and then 73, 73 again during the years from 2015 to 2018. In 2019, we made a big jump from number 73 out of 126 to 54 out of 129 countries. And this year, we moved a little bit more to number 50 among 131 countries. I'm setting a target of moving over to the top 33% or top 1/3 in the Global Innovation Index. I think that must be around rank number 43 by 2022. That will be next year. So there will be 2 more years, okay, waiting for the GII ranking 2021 and 2022. Hopefully, we can move to around 43 rank or 44 rank, be on the top 1/3. Now, in this Global Innovation Index, we were ranked number 4 out of 29 countries, okay, in the region. These are the middle income developing, low or middle income developing economies. And in the Southeast Asian region, 11th out of 17. Okay, so we still need a lot of improvement. Next slide, please. Now, since my topic is securing the future with inclusive and sustainable innovation for development, I have entitled the following slides as towards inclusive science, technology, and innovation. One of the, shall we say, important developments is when 5 departments, the Department of Trade and Industry, the Department of Science and Technology, the Department of Information and Communications Technology, CHED, and the Department of Agriculture signed an agreement way back in around 2018 when we agreed to have what we call an inclusive industry innovation roadmap. Okay, and last 2019, towards the end of 2019, we are happy to have a law that was signed, which is entitled the Innovative Startup Act and also the Philippine Innovation Act. We at the OST lobbied very strongly for the enactment of the Innovative Startup Act, because this will really help our technology-based startups. And in the law, there were 3 departments that were given the mandate to support startups. These are the Department of Information and Communications Technology, the Department of Science and Technology, and the Department of Trade and Industry. We have already signed the IRR for that, implementing rules and regulations. And now we have already, we are now in the formation stage for the National Steering Committee. Next slide, please. Now, one of the areas that was mentioned in the Philippine Innovation Strategy or the National Innovation Strategy document way back in 2007 is investment in human capital. And here I would like to show the improvements that has taken place, at least in terms of numbers, okay, through the scholarship programs that the Department of Science and Technology has been supporting. The darkest color that you see are the numbers or number of scholars in our science high school, specifically the Philippine Science High School, which is one of the 18 agencies of the Department of Science and Technology. At the middle, the next lighter blue would be the number of DOST scholars in the baccalaureate program, the different degrees leading to bachelor's degree. That includes, of course, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And we have, on a lighter shade, are the scholars at the MS level and at the PhD level. I was mentioning earlier in my slide on the future that I do expect the University of Santo Tomas to contribute very significantly in the production of MS and PhDs in science and technology. And you can see the improvement in the numbers. From 2018, 19, 20, you can see the improvement for figures from 36,791 right to 41,820, and last year to 44,475. If I may just include a rough indicator, when I came in, we were admitting around 5,000 new freshman scholars, okay? And in 2020, we were already admitting around 10,000 new freshman scholars. For 2021-2022, we expect to admit around 14,000 to 15,000 new Bachelor of Science freshman scholars. We thank the Department of Budget and Management for helping us by means of an improved budget for scholarships. Next slide, please. Other than investment in human capital, or in addition to what we have been doing in investing in human capital, we have thought of innovating also in terms of human resource development. And one, shall we say, concrete example that I can cite is our program, which we call Smarter Philippines through Data Analytics, Research and Development, Training and Adoption, which we call for short SPARTA. Now, actually, if I may share with you, way back in 1985, I was planning officer of the National Science and Technology Authority, which later became the Department of Science and Technology, 1985, that's 36 years ago. I wrote an article entitled The Science and Technology System in the Philippines in the 2000. So it was more of a forecast of what will happen. And naturally, as I people in preparing for my article, there was a lot of mention about artificial intelligence. So I included in that article that there will be a lot of R&D ongoing on artificial intelligence by the year 2000. Unfortunately, that did not happen. And so we actually realized we were already late. And so we have to act fast, okay, in building our capabilities and doing our R&D in the area of artificial intelligence. So by the year, it must be around 2015 when there was already a decision to move fast in the area of data analytics and artificial intelligence. By around 2017, 2018, we had already trained a small number, less than 150, mainly coming from the universities, okay, from the ICT sector, and from the government also, those who had the background that will be needed to have a course in data analytics and artificial intelligence. And we realized that that will be a very, very slow process of building an adequate number of manpower that will be skilled. And so we decided to develop an online program. This was way back in 2019. So this was before the pandemic. And we commissioned our Development Academy of the Philippines to be the one to administer the program, the SPARTA program. And we asked our Data Analytics Association of the Philippines to do the course. And it is something like a Coursera program, okay? And here we made available 30,000 slots, okay, mainly from people in the ICT sector, the BPO sector, the academe, the government. And out of the 30,000 slots that we have created, we have now close to 24,000 who have been enrolled or who have already finished the program. One of the features of that program, particularly for the participants coming from government, is to require them for their capstone project to do something that they can introduce right in their workplace. Okay? An app or a software or a model that they can use using what they learned in Coursera, and that is what we are doing now. We give additional support to the student to do and finish that program so that they can already introduce the innovations in their own workplace. Next slide, please. Another, if I can call this innovation, that we have introduced regarding human resource development is to make our scholars aware that they were not only they were not just privileged to be supported by the government, but they have a responsibility for the country. And so now our scholars, particularly those in the undergraduate program, are asked to participate in a values formation program. It's about a week that they have to undergo during their entire 4 or 5 year course program. Of course, they learn what the country needs. They learn how they can contribute. They experience working with people in the community to find out what science and technology can do for them, how science can work for our people. So the future is shaped not only by the cognitive abilities of our youth, but more of their character to care and be empathic to the plight of others. Next slide, please. Now we move to the research and development interventions. We required to come up, okay, several, all of the stakeholders in R&D, okay, from government to from the private sector, meet, okay, and agree on a harmonized national research and development agenda, which is required to be approved by the National Economic Development Authority. So we have one harmonized national R&D agenda for the entire 6 years of this administration until the year 2022. And basically, this is divided into 5 sectors. We have the National Integrated Basic Research Agenda, or NIBRA, which is being coordinated and monitored by the National Research Council of the Philippines. We have the Health Research Agenda, which is coordinated and monitored by the Philippine Council for Health Research and Development, or PCHRD. We have the Sector for Agriculture, Aquatic, and Natural Resources, R&D, and this is coordinated and monitored and supported by our Philippine Council for Agriculture, Aquatic, and Natural Resources, R&D, or PICARD. And therefore, and then for industry, energy, and emerging technologies, we have shared the Philippine Council for Industry, Energy, and Emerging Technologies, R&D. We have added a 5th sector, which has become very, very important in the past years, is the Disaster Risk Reduction and Climate Change Adaptation Agenda. Okay. Next slide, please. These are actually the list of major topics under its R&D agenda, and this is actually included in the Philippine Development Plan. So for research proposals should conform to this harmonized national R&D agenda. Right away, the councils involved will check whether your proposal falls under any one of these. If it does not fall under any one of these, most likely your proposal will not be accepted or will not be approved. Next slide, please. Now, we have to invest in R&D, and while our percentage of our GDP that is invested to R&D is very small, and I think I already decided to stop complaining, but to make do what we are given to us and to leverage by way of getting the partnership of other stakeholders so that the amount will be bigger. And that is the reason why I was telling you that I'm very happy that now other departments are partnering with us in their R&D. For example, never before did we had projects under the Department of Public Works and Highways. Now, they invest particularly in developing systems that will monitor the health and strength of infrastructure. We have, for example, partnership with the DBM in terms of monitoring the status of projects using remote sensing. We have the partnership with the Energy Department, and this is in terms of electric mobility. So investing in science, in research and development is important. And we have implemented, this is since I came in, because of my overall vision of inclusive and sustainable development, we implemented the Science for Change program, which has basically, this is actually an R&D oriented program, and we have 4 subcomponents. Next slide, please. The first subcomponent is what we call the niche centers in the regions for R&D. And our way of developing capability in science and technology and R&D in other regions of the country is to help set up and support niche centers in these regions. Many of them are within the universities, particularly the state universities and colleges, and others are found in research institutes of other departments. So, for example, there are departments who have research units. DOH has RITM, DA has a research unit for fisheries, and so forth. And by the end of, this must be 20, this has increased now. The 22 that is mentioned here has gone up to 26. And I think the 26th or the 25th one is the one for UST regarding the use of indigenous materials related to energy. And so this actually, these centers deal on a very narrow and very specific area or product or technology. But that is how we can build strength that will be needed for that particular region, and that will be useful in utilizing the opportunities and resources in that region. So you can see here, for example, a research center for spruce in Nueva Vizcaya, a research center for sea cucumber in Misamis Oriental, a research center for seaweeds in Tawi-Tawi, and so forth and so on. Next slide, please. The other component or subcomponent, which is directly related to our niche research centers program, is the RD Lead or the R&D Leadership Program. So we invite nationally known and even internationally known experts, Filipino experts, at least initially, who wants or who, shall we say, are willing to stay in different in regions other than where they come from, to be able to assist the institutions there, help build capability in R&D. So, for example, as of the middle of 2020, and this was this has to be updated now, 32 RD leaders have been fielded in 14 regions of the country, and there were a total of 30 host institutions which were assisted. So some of them stay for as long as 6 months, helping them develop their R&D strategic program, helping them in coming up with good proposals, helping them in even developing their people who are working in the R&D units. Next slide, please. The other one is targeted towards industry. We know that industry would like to do R&D so that they can solve technical problems in their enterprises, so that they can develop new products, new technologies, new processes. But again, most of these enterprises, particularly the small and medium enterprises, including the micro, of course, do not have research people, do not have research facilities to be able to do their own R&D, other than the shop floor innovation that they can make. And so we, on the other hand, people from the university and from the research institutes, okay, are very eager to do research. Well, we know that they have to produce scientific publications, they have to register intellectual properties, and So we ask our enterprises to formulate their problem or their objective in a research that they want to be done, and select either a university or a research institute to do the research for them in partnership. They contribute their own resources, of course, but we contribute a bigger part so that they will be motivated to partner in R&D. Next slide, please. This is one that has just started. Not too many projects yet, but this is business innovation to science and technology for industry. We had just started on this when the pandemic came, and as we know, our enterprises are suffering from the results of the pandemic, of the impact of the pandemic. But this one actually is like our small enterprise technology upgrading program, wherein we enable them to procure the necessary hardware and software so that they can do their own R&D. Of course, they repay us later at no interest scheme, okay, just so they can have their own R&D capability. Next slide, please. Now we move to the contributions of our micro, small, and medium enterprises, as well as our startups. They actually contribute to innovations. Innovation thrives in startups and enterprises. Helping them will create a long-term impact and have a ripple effect of shaping an inclusive and sustainable future for Filipinos. It is pleasantly surprising that once we have assisted our enterprises through setup, the Small Enterprises Technology Upgrading Program, themselves think of new innovations, okay, on their own, from their own people, using their own facilities, whatever they have, and they come up with new products, new technologies, new processes. For the startups, we have actually two kinds or two programs now. One is under the Innovative Startup Act, okay, that I mentioned earlier. This will be an assistance to our startups, either through R&D or product development, through technology business incubation, and other related assistance. But we also have a special program for our OFWs who have returned and want to set up their technology-based micro enterprises. This is the iForward PH, which actually means innovations from Filipinos working distantly from the Philippines, or IFWD, iForward PH, for our coming back OFWs. Next slide, please. Now, we also have what we call innovations at the grassroots or from the grassroots. We have a program helping marginalized communities, and we have a definition and categorization of who are marginalized, okay? And we offer a package of interventions, because in these groups or communities, and I think the university should also think about this. They need a lot of things. For one, most likely they don't even have clean water to drink. Most likely, many of their children are malnourished. Most likely, their access to education is very limited. And then, of course, they are the groups who are often exposed to natural disasters. They are the groups who need livelihood. And that is how we come in. Now, in the livelihood aspect, we try to take into account what they can do and what are available resources in the area and what are the marketable products that they can produce. And so DOST stimulates the creation of grassroots innovation by providing marginalized communities with a package of S&T intervention to empower and to develop them. And there are many success stories in this program. Next slide, please. Do not think that science and technology is only involving chemistry, physics, mathematics, engineering, medicine. In the 10-point economic agenda of President Duterte when he came in 2016, there were 4 actually that directly relates to science and technology. The agenda on being globally competitive, of course, has definitely, shall we say, putting a responsibility also on the science and technology community. The agenda on improving the value chain, particularly in helping the rural industries, is also requiring the intervention of the science and technology community. The agenda on having world-class human resources also has puts a lot of responsibility on the science and technology community. And then the president said we should have, okay, we should promote science, technology, and the creative arts towards enhanced inclusive development. And so we have since then been trying to have programs that wherein science, technology can help our creative arts sector. Shown here are two examples. We set up a yarn production center in MEOWS, Iloilo, now being operated by the Iloilo Science and Technology University. It is a very modern yarn production facility that can process many different kinds of raw materials: cotton, pineapple, abaca, banana, and maybe even bamboo later on. But here we are mainly processing cotton and pineapple coming from the natural produce in the area. And how does it relate to the creative arts? Well, those areas are actually the traditional sources of hand woven natural fabrics developed into native designs and native wear. The hablon of Iloilo, for example, has been revived. Before, the hablon weavers were not comfortable anymore because they say that the raw materials are coming from the Visoria, and so it's not really their own native product. But now they can use their own native yarns to do their creative designs and, of course, products. Now we have also come up with a project to try to preserve, okay, and to develop technologies that will be best for the production of our indigenous bamboo instruments that are found all over the country. And so the Forest Products Research and Development Institute has initiated a project. They look, okay, first of all, with the help of the College of Music and the College of Engineering of UP also, they have inventoried the bamboo musical instruments. There has been already some kind of a data bank recording the sounds that come from these musical instruments. They have research on what materials will be best and what processes will be the best to produce them so that they can be preserved for a longer period. Next, I think I'm towards the end of my long message already, and innovations to R&D is also being supported by our Balik Scientist program. R&D and innovation are the catalyst for economic growth. It's now more than ever that we need to invest heavily in nurturing and accelerating the country's R&D ecosystem. And with the passage of the Balik Scientist law in 2018, we have been attracting more. Again, because of the pandemic, many of them cannot come physically, but we have also a modified system of getting them served even if they are not here, okay, through virtual participation as a short-term Balik scientist. Next slide. Let me just repeat, and I think there will be no disagreement before me and UST. Securing the future should not be a prosperous future for some nor many. It is a secured future that should be sustainable and inclusive for all, especially the marginalized. And we should be guided by our faith, by our values to produce innovations. The last slide is actually something for networking purposes. So this is these are our contact details for the councils who are directly involved in processing research grants and coordinating them and monitoring them. And then we have also the Special Projects Division, similarly doing that work that would entail interdisciplinarity. And of course, for scholarships, we have the Science Education Institute. I would like to thank you once again for, next slide please, for giving me this opportunity, this honor to speak before you. I have spoken before the science and innovation events at UST before, maybe 3-4 times already, but this is the first time that it has been on a modified system. Thank you very much. Magandang umaga, mabuhay kayong lahat.
Maraming salamat po, Secretary De La Peña, for your message that not only celebrates the things that we can all be proud of from the past, but more so excites us for the things that we look forward to in the future. At this point in time, allow us to present the virtual certificate of appreciation to our keynote speaker. The citation reads, "The University of Santo Tomas College of Science awards this certificate of appreciation to the Honorable Fortunato de la Peña for being the keynote speaker for the opening ceremonies during the College of Science Week 2021 MEOWS 2.0 with the theme Science Works, Securing the Future with Science, held from March 8 to 12, 2021. Signed, Assistant Professor Alan Rodel M. Salcedo, PhD, the overall chairperson of the College of Science Week 2021. Professor Ray Don S. Papa, PhD, the Dean of the College of Science, and our Father Regent, Reverend Father Louis R. Coronel, HEL, of the Order of Preachers. My dear friends, a virtual clap, please, for our keynote speaker, the Honorable Fortunato de la Peña. Secretary, maraming salamat po.
Maraming salamat din.
Thank you po. Okay. As we move on with our opening ceremony, it was mentioned by Dean Papa in the introduction that one of the innovations introduced during the 95th anniversary of the College of Science is the Albertus Magnus Faith and Science Lectures. According to our Dean, this lecture is a fitting start to the 5-year countdown leading to the Centennial Celebrations of the College of Science of the Pontifical and Royal University of Santo Tomas, the Catholic University of the Philippines. This event honors the college's patron saint, Albert the Great, or Albertus Magnus in Latin, a Dominican friar, bishop, professor, and scientist, indeed a man of faith and science. The UST College of Science is unique among other colleges of science in the country and even in this part of the world, for it is a college of science housed within the auspices of a pontifical university. As such, the community of the College of Science is perfectly situated to play a bigger role in highlighting the commonalities between faith and science, and emphasize the important role Catholic and Christian scientists play in the development of their own respective disciplines. Therefore, as part of the preparations for the centennial, the UST College of Science now provides us a venue for greater academic discourse and an appreciation of the mutual bonds between faith and science. This is envisioned to be its lasting legacy and worthwhile contribution as an academic unit celebrating its centennial in educating Christian and Catholic scientists in the year 2026 and beyond. At this point, my friends, I have the honor of introducing the inaugural speaker of the Albertus Magnus Faith and Science Lecture. The speaker is the incumbent chair of Cornell University's Department of Astronomy and is the David C. Duncan Professor in the Physical Sciences. With a career spanning 35 years, he has engaged in scientific research, teaching, strategic planning, public advocacy, and university administration. He has played key roles in multiple United States and international planetary and astronomical missions, chaired high-profile committees for NASA, NSF, and the U.S. National Research Council, testified before Congress of the United States, and directed or chaired academic and research units at 2 universities. He was elected to the United States National Academy of Science 11 years ago in 2010. A decorated scientist, he has received recognitions from the International Academy of Astronautics, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the University of Arizona, Time Magazine, and the American Astronomical Society, to name a few. My dear friends from the Galing Science community, please welcome Professor Jonathan I. Lunin, PhD.
Thank you very much, Professor Hernandez, Honorable Secretary de la Peña, Dean Papa, and Reverend Father Louis. It's an extraordinary honor to be given the opportunity to give the inaugural Albertus Magnus Faith and Science Lecture and to be with you this morning. I am a convert to Catholicism, and after I converted to Catholicism, I came to realize more than I had prior to that, the extent to which in the United States, faith and science are seen to be at odds with each other, indeed at war with each other. And this is not a new idea. In fact, the first president of my university, of Cornell University, Andrew Dixon White, wrote a two-volume treatise in 1896 on the war of science with theology, in which he essentially tried to make the case, unsuccessfully, I think, that everywhere that religion had anything to do with science, that it was a disastrous interaction. And wherever science exerted its influence, it triumphed. And so that book, as well as a few others a century ago, had quite an impact in the United States. And so I have been concerned in my own life in being able to push back against this view that science and religion are at war with each other, are incompatible with each other. And I have found, and now I'm going to share my slides, so let's see if this works. I found that one of the most effective ways to make this case is to highlight the lives of scientists who are not only scientists, but also people of faith. And very often the most dramatic examples of those individuals are those who actually led religious lives, who were religious or are religious. The Vatican Astronomy Group is one excellent example of that today. But one of my scientific heroes in that regard is Georges Limetra, an extraordinary individual who revolutionized cosmology, which is the study of the origin and structure of the universe, in the first half of the 20th century, and is recognized as the father of the Big Bang model for the beginning of the universe. And so the main points of my lecture today will be as follows. Georges Limetra was both a Catholic priest and an astronomer. This dual career continues to surprise people. And when I give lectures live on this subject, there are always quite a few people in the audience who come up to me afterwards and express surprise that a Catholic priest could be an astronomer or a scientist in general. And we know of many of those, including my good colleague, Father Nicanor, who serves with me on the board of the Society of Catholic Scientists. The second point is I will go through how the Big Bang model was developed by Limetra, and I will set the stage for that with what was understood about the nature of the universe at the time that he began working. The third point is that Limetra lived his dual careers harmoniously. We see that in many of the interviews he gave and his activities beyond his science. But he did experience conflicts with his colleagues over religion and the question of whether the Big Bang model was or was not religiously motivated. It was not. And Limetra spoke honestly and openly about the boundaries between science and faith. And I want to give you a little flavor for some of what he said in that regard. So let me begin with an overview of Limetre's life. He was born in 1894 in a city in Belgium, Charleroi. He served with distinction. In fact, he was awarded, medaled for his service in the 3rd Army Division during World War I. He knew from the time that he was a teenager that he would become a priest, but he also was fascinated by mathematical physics. And so he took a master's in math from the University of Louvain in Belgium in 1920, and then was ordained to the priesthood in 1923. Subsequent to his ordination, he was given permission by his superiors to travel out of the country, first to the United Kingdom, and then to the United States, where he pursued and completed a PhD in physics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in 1927. He immediately was named a professor back at Louvain. In 1927, he spent the rest of his career there. He won in 1934 the Franck Prize for his work in cosmology. He was nominated by Albert Einstein. And an interesting note is that at the time, this was the 2nd most lucrative prize that one could receive in physics after the Nobel Prize. And he then was awarded the Eddington Medal of the Royal Astronomical Society in 1953. He was elected to the Pontifical Academy of Sciences in 1936, becoming its president in 1960. He was named a prelate of the papal household during that time as well. He retired from teaching in 1964, and he died at Louvain in 1966. Now, this is only a skeleton of his extraordinary life, and to give you a sense of what he did and the scientific adventures that he went through, I first have to tell you what the picture was of the universe at the time that Lemaitre began studying. So it was just 104 years ago that Albert Einstein published his theory of general relativity. This is a theory of gravity. It's a geometric theory in which masses distort space. Light does not move in straight lines in space. It does in 4-dimensional space-time. But that distortion of space is what we perceive as the gravitational force. At the time that Einstein developed this theory, the universe was assumed to be static and eternal. This notion of an eternal universe, of course, goes back a long ways to Aristotle. Thomas Aquinas, the student of St. Albert the Great, in his great philosophical work, the Summa Theologiae, offered that the universe might be eternal, but from the point of view of his faith and our faith, he felt that it was not. But there was nothing to argue against a static universe at the time. At the turn of the 20th century, telescopes were not sufficiently powerful to resolve what we now know to be galaxies beyond our own Milky Way galaxy. There was a debate about whether these spiral structures were nebulae or clouds within our own galaxy, or collections of stars, island universes, if you will, beyond our own galaxy. Einstein, therefore, assumed that the reality he was trying to describe with his model of general relativity was a fixed reality, where things were not moving relative to each other, that everything was homogeneous and static. The problem that he had was that it was difficult to maintain a static universe if all of the matter that was present was curving space and time in such a way that it would all collapse on itself. So why would there still be a universe to worry about from Einstein's general relativistic point of view? In fact, Einstein had to avoid the collapse of his static universe by introducing a very famous term into his equations of general relativity called the cosmological constant, which was essentially an arbitrary geometric factor that provided a repulsion to resist the mutual pull of the stars that would cause the universe to collapse. Now, Einstein didn't like this idea, but he also didn't engage with the astronomical data as it began to come in the 1920s, showing that the universe, in fact, was not static. But meanwhile, in the early 1920s, a Russian mathematician, Alexander Friedman, decided to do a wide range of solutions to the equations of general relativity, providing what are called metrics or geometries in which the universe was collapsing, expanding, doing various different things. So Friedman was really the first to provide a solution that involved an expanding universe, but he too did not have access to astronomical data from his position in Russia. And tragically, he died before the data that would tell astronomers that the universe really was expanding would become available. And so his work, while of mathematical interest, and is in fact credited as being one of the metrics that are commonly used in general relativity today, that was as far as he was able to go. Another mathematical physicist, Wilhelm De Sitter, who is shown in the lower right, actually, talking with Albert Einstein, provided a different solution that solved the problem of the collapsing universe. He assumed that the universe had no matter in it at all. Now, this would seem to be unrealistic, but it was a limiting case of a situation where the universe might be so dilute that matter would not cause space to collapse in upon itself. Indeed, in De Sitter's model, if you put two pieces of matter, two test particles, if you will, into his solutions, they would actually gradually move apart. So it was into this environment, this milieu of interesting activity in solving the equations of general relativity that Limetra found himself. And in his dissertation and in a paper that he subsequently published, he developed an exact solution to general relativity that was a hybrid between the De Sitter model of an empty universe and the Einstein model. Indeed, it was essentially a De Sitter universe that at early times would converge to an Einstein static model. But Limetra's model was an expanding universe. The universe actually was expanding in his solution. Space was increasing in volume over time. And this became one of the classic metrics for a homogeneous isotropic expanding universe, really the first successful one. Homogeneous in that any place in the universe looked more or less the same as any other. Isotropic in the sense that no matter where you looked in the sky, you would see essentially the same thing. And space was expanding. The difference between what Lemaitre did and what De Sitter and Friedman and others did is that Lemaitre actually engaged with the data. When he worked on his PhD thesis, he actually worked at the Harvard College Observatory across town from MIT and was engaged with the data. And so he was aware in the mid-1920s, and in fact, he worked on these data, that it was becoming known that the galaxies, number one, there were galaxies outside of our own Milky Way, that the spiral nebulae were galaxies, and number two, that these galaxies were expanding away from each other. Now, how is that known? Well, by the mid-1920s, astronomers were able to take what are called spectra of galaxies, collections of stars that are orbiting around each other and distant from our own Milky Way. And the spectra are essentially maps of the intensity of light as a function of color or as a function of wavelength. And those maps of the intensity versus wavelength were found to have key dips in them that corresponded to the presence of certain elements in the atmospheres of the stars that made up these galaxies. But the curious fact that observational astronomers discovered was that that pattern of dips and rises in the spectra were shifted for galaxies that were fainter and smaller, and therefore presumably farther away from us, so that a spectrum that might have these black lines, these absorption features, which you see on the right here, in a more distant galaxy, those were shifted toward the red. And shifting toward the red is an indication that the galaxy is moving away from the observer, because the light, which is essentially a wave of energy, of electromagnetic radiation moving through the vacuum, that wavelength is stretched out as the galaxy is moving away from us. Light has a finite speed, and so that stretching of the light is detectable. But there was a lot of discussion about what that redshift really meant. Was it that the galaxies were moving away from us through a fixed space? Or was it that the light was losing energy by some process that was not understood? Lemaitre understood immediately that, in fact, what was happening was that space was expanding, because what was seen in the spectra of galaxies was exactly what he expected from his solution to the equations of general relativity. And you can see that in this very simple experiment, where if you think about our 3 dimensions of space as reduced to just 2 dimensions on the surface of a balloon, and don't worry about the 3rd dimension inside the balloon. We can talk about what that might mean during the discussion. But let's just think of space as the 2-dimensional surface of the balloon. Then at a given time, as you see in the lower left image, there are 2 galaxies indicated by dots. The one toward the center is our galaxy. The one on the left is some other galaxy. And if light is traveling from that other galaxy to us, it has a definite wavelength. And I've drawn it so that you can measure the wavelength as indicated by the blue bar. Now, it may take that galaxy's billions of, the light from that galaxy, billions of years to get to us. And so by the time that's happened in Lemaitre's model, space has expanded. And so the light wave has been stretched out during that time before it gets to us, so that now the measured wavelength, by the time the light arrives at our galaxy, at our observer, that wavelength is now stretched out and is longer. Not because the galaxy is moving through space, but because the galaxy is, as we are, embedded within an expanding fabric of space, the expanding universe of Georges Lemaitre. What Lemaitre did was to derive the relationship between the distance to that galaxy and its recessional velocity, its velocity away from us. And what he found was that, in fact, the two were just proportional to each other. And if you think about those dots on the balloon, you can understand why that is. And I'll let you think about that as a thought exercise. And if you want, we can discuss it at the end. But the traditional story that you read in textbooks is that this speed-distance relationship, that the galaxy's speed is equal to a constant h multiplied by the distance to the galaxy, was invented by an American astronomer, Edwin Hubble, who published this relationship in a paper in 1929. And that constant, in fact, became known as Hubble's constant, and the relationship became known as Hubble's law, probably the most famous law or relationship in astronomy. So why is it that Edwin Hubble was credited with this discovery? In fact, Lemaitre published that same relationship 2 years earlier in 1927. Now, Hubble's publication was a report of observations that he and his colleagues had made, and he fitted the recession velocity and the distance to the linear relationship that he then wrote down in his paper. Lemaitre did the same thing, but he started with his mathematical model, his solution to the equations of general relativity, and then showed that the data that he had at hand in 1927, 2 years before Hubble, was consistent with that. The big problem, though, was that Lemaitre published his result in a Belgian journal, the Annals of the Scientific Society of Brussels, in French. Now, remember, in 1927, there was no internet. If you were going to read a journal, your library had to subscribe to it. It had to arrive by regular mail. And a limited number of journals were available in the leading institutions in the world, which were not in Belgium, but were in Germany, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Few people read French. It was not the language of astronomy. And so this paper was simply ignored. It was not known by the majority of astronomers. Now, all of this would have been a very forgotten piece of history were it not for an interesting accident. In 1930, a year after Hubble published his paper and 3 years after Lemaitre published his, Arthur Eddington, who had been Lemaitre's advisor in England before he went on to Cambridge, Massachusetts, gave a talk and published an article in which he tried to explain Hubble's data by offering exactly the same solution to the equations of general relativity that Lemaitre had put together in 1927 and in fact had put together in his thesis. When a student who heard this talk alerted Lemaitre to this, the former post-student of Eddington wrote to his former professor and said, "Hey, I did this 2 years ago." Now, Eddington was a very kind and generous individual. He was a devout Quaker, and he was horrified that he had forgotten that Lemaitre had in fact done the same thing. Part of it was the obscurity of the paper, but Lemaitre had sent him that paper, and Eddington realized that he had, as happens to many of us, subconsciously incorporated Lemaitre's model and then reinvented it as if it were his own. And at that point, he said to his former student, "We need to get your 1927 paper translated and published in English." And that is exactly what happened in March of 1931. In the monthly notices of the Royal Astronomical Society came out the English language translation of Lemaitre's 1927 paper. But the translation was missing the key portion of the 1927 paper that established that Lemaitre had come up with what we call the Hubble law, the speed-distance relationship. And here in French, from the original article, is that derivation. And I'll just read it to you in English. Using the 42 galaxies taken from Hubble's list and from Stromberg, and taking account of the proper motion of the sun, one finds a mean distance of 0.95 million parsecs. That's a unit of distance that astronomers use, and a radial velocity, that's the recession velocity, of 600 kilometers per second, hence 625 kilometers per second per million parsecs. He derived the Hubble constant in 1927. Now, he didn't fit these to a straight line. He just took all the data, averaged it, and then divided the speed by the distance to get his result. And that's going to play a role in why the English translation omitted this particular paragraph. But for many decades, people thought that the omission was due to the fact that Lemaitre, being a priest, had suffered from some sort of essentially I would say, bigotry against religious scientists. That turned out not to be the case. In 2011, Mario Livio, an astronomer at Space Telescope Science Institute, dug through the files of the Royal Society in 1931 and found the answer to why that paragraph had been omitted from the English translation of Limetra's 1927 paper, the paragraph that would have given him priority over Edwin Hubble. And the answer is that Lemaitre had made the omission himself. In fact, Lemaitre had written to the editor of the monthly notices and said in his cover letter that he did the translation himself, number one, and number two, he didn't find it advisable to reprint what he calls the provisional discussions of radial velocities, which is clearly of no actual interest. And Lemaitre's English was not perfect. It's clear that what he meant was of no current interest. And the reason he said this was in the intervening 4 years from when he published his paper to 1931, the data had become so much better that first of all, in 1929, Hubble could actually fit a linear relationship directly to the data instead of averaging data. And it got even better in the ensuing 2 years. And so Lemaitre didn't want to republish poor data. He was more interested in publishing his solution, his expanding universe solution to the equations of general relativity, which remained current and remained crucially important. And in doing so, gave up his priority to that famous relationship, that Hubble's law. Now, the irony in this is that Edwin Hubble, who's regarded therefore as the father of the expanding universe, didn't actually believe that the universe was expanding. He was a consummate observer. In fact, here he is hosting Albert Einstein at the 100-inch telescope on Mount Wilson. But Hubble didn't understand general relativity, and he couldn't believe that that space was expanding. He thought that the redshift was because light would lose energy as it moved through large expanses of space. And indeed, in 1941, you can pull up an article from the Los Angeles Times featuring Hubble, basically saying that the universe was static. To the end of his own days, he never came out in favor of an expanding universe, and yet he is regarded as the person who demonstrated it. Now again, this might have been the end of Lemaitre's notoriety, but for the fact that he began to wrestle with the implications of his solution to the theory of general relativity. He got into a debate with Eddington about what would happen in the early period of the expanding universe. Would there be a simple sort of asymptotic slowing down as you go back in time to an eternal universe? Lemaitre felt that that made no sense whatsoever. And instead, he redid his solution, his metric, so that the universe had a finite age to it. And he published the result of that in a letter to Nature, a journal, a British journal, written in English, thankfully this time, in which he disagreed with his former advisor who was arguing that the universe essentially went back asymptotically in time to infinity. And he said, no. Lemaitre said the universe has a finite beginning, that if you run the clock back, space becomes ultimately very small, incredibly dense, and all of matter is packed into what is essentially, he called a single quantum or primeval atom. As Stephen Hawking says, this state, the primeval atom, essentially was what we now call the Big Bang model. And what's interesting about this very short article by Lemaitre is that, number one, he combines ideas of general relativity with quantum mechanics in this brief discussion. No one had tried to do that before, and that's, of course, a topic of great interest today. But number two, if you read this material, and particularly the paragraph that I'm outlining here, his discussion of what happened at the Big Bang, at that moment, is that time itself and space began to exist. that this was not simply an event in the history of a longer universe, but this was a definite change in the state of reality. And we'll get back to what Limetra thought about what occurred prior to the Big Bang a little bit later. In fact, it is not sensible to even say what happened before the Big Bang if time began at the Big Bang. And if you read this text, if you pull this article up and read it, and you then go and read St. Augustine's discussion of the origin of time in his book, The City of God, it's almost word for word the same. It's hard to imagine that Limetra wasn't inspired to phrase things this way. The beginning of the world happened a little before the beginning of space and time. And earlier than that, he talks about how a single individual quantum would not have a sense of motion or change to it. Both of these are modernized versions of what Augustine says in The City of God, which is really, to me, fascinating. So Limetra was the originator of the Big Bang model. But then he did a number of other things that I'll talk about at the end of this lecture. However, his work was stopped, as was that of many individuals, by World War II. He tried to get out of Belgium before the Nazis invaded, and he was unable to. And so he continued to work in Louvain. He was injured by an Allied bombing run that mistakenly hit the university instead of the railway station. It traumatized him. And then the war was over, and it would be possible again to get back to work and interact with his colleagues on cosmology. But a couple of events happened that turned Limetra away from work on cosmology. One of those involved an alternative model to the Big Bang, and the other involved the Pope, Pius XII. So after World War II, three scientists in the United Kingdom, Fred Hoyle, Hermann Bondi, and Thomas Gold, and Thomas Gold founded the modern Department of Astronomy at Cornell a decade or so later, by the way. They developed what they called the steady state model of the universe, intended to counter the Big Bang model. In the Big Bang theory, the universe has a finite fixed amount of matter and energy. The universe expands, and so space becomes more dilute. The galaxies or clusters of galaxies spread apart from each other. In the steady state theory, the universe doesn't have a beginning. Space expands, but matter is created in between the galaxies and the space left behind by the galaxies, so that the universe always looks the same at any given time, and the universe is eternal. It's everlasting. Now, how does that matter get created? Well, that was left as an exercise to the reader. Why would this model be put together? Well, a number of astronomers had a real distaste for models that had a beginning to them. And in fact, Fred Hoyle, who was quite a self-promoter and had his own radio show, asserted that what he called the Big Bang model, Limetra never called it the Big Bang, he called it the primeval atom model, but Hoyle renamed it the Big Bang model, was, according to Hoyle, inspired by religion. He said the reason why scientists like it is because they're overshadowed by the book of Genesis. It is deep within the psyche of most scientists to believe in the first page of Genesis. Limetra disagreed with this. He pushed back, but he lost that battle not because Hoyle was a better debater, but because the Pope essentially intervened on the side of Fred Hoyle. Inadvertently, in 1951, 2 years after that statement by Hoyle and 3 years after the steady state model, Pope Pius XII opened the meeting of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences in November of 1951 with a famous speech called the Fiat Lux speech, Let There Be Light, in which he said that present-day science confirmed the contingency of the universe, confirmed that the universe had a finite age to it and that creation took place, and therefore there's a creator, and therefore God exists. Now, Limetra, who's shown in this picture 12 years earlier with Pope Pius XII, was a member of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, not yet its president. He was in the audience. He was horrified. He recognized that the Pope had essentially put his stamp on the idea that his Big Bang model was religiously inspired, just as Hoyle said. And furthermore, Lemaitre learned after the meeting that the Pope had been invited to give essentially the same speech to the International Astronomical Union in that next year. That's a much larger organization. And Lemaitre actually went to Rome on the way to another meeting and was able to intervene with the Pope's advisors and maybe with the Holy Father himself, so that when Pope Pius XII gave his speech to the International Astronomical Union, that part of the speech was gone. But nonetheless, Lemaitre's model was tainted. Hoyle and George Gamow, another atheist scientist, went around lampooning the model as the Big Bang, and Lemaitre is the Big Bang man, and the Pope endorses it, and so forth. Lemaitre was really, by these conflicts, driven away from further work in cosmology. Also, a lot of the new developments associated with the Big Bang had come to be not so much in general relativity, but in nuclear physics, which was not Lemaitre's field. And so for those two reasons, Lemaitre did no further work in cosmology in the 1950s. He became a pioneer in Belgium in the use of digital computing and mathematical physics, and made some very important developments in that area. But before Lemaitre died, he got his revenge on Hoyle. In the 1960s, radio astronomers detected through their relatively primitive radio telescopes a kind of a universal static that was all over the sky. And it was a static that actually was predicted by the nuclear physicists who were working on the implications of the Big Bang model for the behavior of light and matter in the first phase, the first million years, essentially, of the history of the universe. Initially, space was so dense with matter that it was very hot, and electrons were separated from the neutrons and protons, and those free electrons absorbed all the light there was. At some point, about 480,000 years after the Big Bang, the universe cooled and became dilute enough that the electrons combined with the neutrons and protons to make atoms. Space became transparent, and the light was separated from the darkness. And that moment at which light was free to move through space redshifted out. Remember, this is 14 billion years ago. It was redshifted way out to the radio part of the spectrum, and was detected first by Penzias and Wilson in the 1960s, who won the Nobel Prize for this. This was shortly before his death, and Lemaitre was told by his friends and colleagues that this radio background noise had been detected. He immediately understood it was the signature of the Big Bang. He learned before he died that his model was correct and the steady state model was wrong. Now, let me move from that history of Lemaitre's scientific work to his views on science and faith. And then I'll return to some more of what Lemaitre did in the 1930s before closing. So one of the things that you hear from the new atheists who write books about how science has triumphed over religion is that religious scientists didn't really believe in God. They were religious because that was the way things were up until the 19th and 20th century. And so it's fair to ask, did Lemaitre believe in God? Now, of course, he was a Catholic priest, so one would assume he did. But you can actually find documentation that he very much believed in God, and he also believed that God was in fact present, hidden in the physics that he had teased out in his primeval atom model. We know that because a manuscript version of the 1931 Nature paper exists in the archives at Louvain. And that manuscript version contains an extra paragraph at the end of the article, a paragraph that did not appear in the published version in Nature. And that paragraph says the following: I think that everyone who believes in a supreme being supporting every being and every acting, he meant action, remember his English was not perfect, believes also that God is essentially hidden and may be glad to see how present physics provides a veil hiding the creation. Now, there are two interesting things here. One is, this is the hidden God. So is this his recapitulation of Isaiah chapter 45, talking to Israel, saying, surely God is hidden with you, and contrasting that with the idols of the surrounding peoples. Here, God is hidden in the physics. The physics hides a veil of the creation. But more than that, Limetra says that he believes, everyone who believes, it's obviously him, in a supreme being supporting every being and every acting or action. And to me, this is his statement about Thomistic creation, about creation ex nihilo, that Limetra understood and had studied and read St. Thomas's, perhaps the Summa Theologiae or the Summa Contra Gentiles, don't know which, understood that God supports creation at every moment in time, that God is not a magician who lights the flash paper, as some have put it, at the beginning, at the Big Bang, but that all of reality, all of being is supported at every moment in time. And one can't resist saying that he used the word, Limetra used the word acting or action as a way of hinting at the Thomistic concept and the Aristotelian concept of potency and action, and God as pure act, as pure existence, whose essence is his existence, and is therefore entirely different from simply a powerful being, that God is being himself. I may be reading too much into this, but I suspect that's what Limetra was at. And of course, he crossed his own paragraph out with a pen and didn't include this in what he sent to Nature for publication. Limetra talked openly about the two parts of his life. He said there are two ways of arriving at the truth. I decided to follow them both. Nothing in my working life, nothing I have ever learned in my studies of either religion or science has caused me to change that opinion. I have no conflict to reconcile. There is no conflict between science and faith in this man. Science has not shaken my faith in religion, and religion has never caused me to question the conclusions I reached by scientific methods. Very powerful statement about the compatibility of science and faith. On the question of what the Big Bang was, he talked at length about the metaphysics of this. He says that the Big Bang was a beginning, not a creation. Again, it's clear that he sees creation as creatio ex nihilo, something that happens at every moment by a God who is eternal and sees all moments at the same, let's say, time, and keeps everything in existence all the time. And so Limetra says any pre-existence of the universe has a metaphysical character. It's a philosophical question, he says. You cannot settle the question of whether the Big Bang was really a beginning or a creation of reality or just an episode. He says it's a metaphysical question. And that is, in fact, the case, because the tools of science do not allow us, as we understand it, to go beyond that point. Unless the Big Bang is just one of multiple episodes, but we have no evidence of that. On the comprehensibility of the cosmos, the eternal mystery of the world is its comprehensibility, said Albert Einstein. Why can we understand the cosmos? Limetra had a response to that in the same year. And that response is that the degree of difficulty of the problem of appreciating nature, of decoding what he called the palimpsest, the echoes of the evolution and the beginning in nature, is measurable with the present and future capacity of humanity. That God created humankind so that humankind could appreciate the majesty of the universe, of the cosmos that God created. And Limetra was very firm about this. I believe that too. And it doesn't change the way I do my science, but it gives me a greater appreciation for why we can even do science. And it gives us an assurance that what we're doing actually has some relationship to reality, because our minds have been designed that way. So let me close by just saying a little bit more about Limetra's contributions. Here's a partial list. The expansion of space in his famous metric from 1927. He played around in the 1930s with models in which the expansion rate changed, that space initially expanded rapidly. He needed to do this to reconcile the age of the universe from his models with the ages derived from geology. Again, Limetra was not just a mathematical physicist. He engaged with the data. And so he anticipated the idea of inflation. The role of quantum theory at the origin of the universe is in that 1931 paper. People have commented about that. I'll get to his exploration of what we call dark energy in the moment. Limetra did think about the possibility that the Big Bang was just one demarcation point in a cyclic universe. He looked at cyclic universe models. He studied the formation of galaxies due to random fluctuations of density in the early universe, something that is very much an active exploration today among galaxy evolutionists. And he solved a key problem that made the science of black holes possible. When Schwarzschild developed his mathematical model for what would happen at the surface of a very massive object where the escape velocity became the speed of light, exceeded the speed of light, this we call the event horizon of a black hole. Schwarzschild's solution had a mathematical singularity in it, and that's a problem. And Limetra came along and he essentially renormalized the solution and was able to produce a Schwarzschild solution for the event horizon that didn't have that singularity. He is recognized for that by people who work on black holes and general relativity, but this is actually not well known. And I have to say that if Limetra had survived for some years after the discovery of the cosmic microwave background radiation, a number of people agree he might well have been awarded the Nobel Prize for his Big Bang model. He would have shared it with Penzias and Wilson, perhaps. One more note with respect to dark energy. In 1931, Limetra published a paper, again, this time in English, in the Proceedings of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, in which he explored what the cosmological constant of Albert Einstein might be. And rather than being an arbitrary geometric factor, he points out in this paper that one can take that constant and associate it with a negative pressure, a pressure P that goes as minus the spatial density times c squared, where this is actually not due to normal matter, but is due to the density of energy of the vacuum itself, a vacuum energy, an intrinsic negative pressure that pushes against everything simply due to space itself. And he said, this is the meaning of the cosmological constant, the arbitrary geometric factor that Einstein had put into his equations earlier. And Robert Kirshner, the Harvard astrophysicist, said that Limetra's interpretation, as you see it above, is almost shockingly modern. That is more or less what we say today about the origin of the accelerating universe. It anticipates the idea of dark energy. So to close, the Nobel Prize winner in physics, one of the three winners in 2019, P.J.E. Peebles of Princeton, wrote in the foreword to a biography of Limetra, the demonstration that our physical universe expanded from a very different state grew out of advances in the 1920s and 1930s that to a striking degree were the work of a single person, Georges Lemaitre. Lemaitre was an extraordinary scientist, a pioneer in cosmology whose contributions until recently were underappreciated. He was also a faithful Catholic and a Catholic priest and a Monsignor, a prelate of the papal household. He regarded science and religion as two paths that could be pursued without conflict. And he was not recognized for all of this until in 2018, the International Astronomical Union introduced and had voted on a resolution renaming Hubble's law, the Hubble-Lemaitre law. And here's the resolution, Resolution B4, introduced by several members of the Union to pay tribute to both Lemaitre and Edwin Hubble, to honor the intellectual integrity and modesty of Lemaitre that made him value the progress of science rather than his own visibility, his omission of that key paragraph from his English translation, and some other words. The Union resolves to recommend that from now on the expansion of the universe be referred to as the Hubble-Lemaitre law. This passed with over 70% of the members voting yes. It's important now for those of you who are astronomers to use this longer version of the name of this very famous law. And in the end, it is all about the life of a man who was a faithful Catholic, a believer in God, a thinker about what the nature of reality is, an extraordinary scientist who lived a very interesting and adventurous life in building for us the modern picture of the universe that we hold to be true today. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much to the inaugural speaker of the Albertus Magnus Faith and Science Lectures, Jonathan Lunin, PhD. Let's give him a virtual clap again, everybody.
Thank you.
At this point, we will be opening the floor for questions from our audience members. We will be entertaining questions both from our Zoom chat box as well as the Facebook Live comment section. So please feel free to type in your questions for our speaker.
So here's a question. Would you like me, Professor Hernandez, to read the chat question, or would you like to pick and choose yourself? I see one question here.
If I may be the one to read the first question, Jonathan. So this is from Daniel Vicario. It's a personal question, and if you don't mind answering, what made you a Catholic?
So thank you for that question. This was a very long journey. I was born and raised in New York City in a Jewish household. Our family owned a King James Bible. I spent a lot of time reading from both the Old and New Testament. And in the midst of some very difficult family problems, which I won't get into, I did have an experience in a dream in which I was comforted by Jesus Christ. I did not convert at that time. I was 13 or I think I was 14 years old. My father died around that time. But over the rest of my teenage years and adulthood, I thought a lot about what I believed. And when I became a professor at the University of Arizona, I came to know the Vatican Astronomy Group, the Jesuit fathers and brothers who were also professional astronomers. And I saw in them this extraordinary harmony of science and faith. They lived both aspects of their lives in a beautiful way. And so all those things together, finally, by the time I was in my 40s, I realized it was time for me to stop avoiding the question. I knew what I believed. I knew that I believed in Jesus Christ as the Son of God, as the second person of the Trinity. And I called my good friend, our son's pediatrician, who was Catholic, and he became my sponsor, and I pursued the RCIA process at the Newman Center at the University of Arizona. And so at the age of 48, I was baptized and confirmed in the Catholic Church. So it was a very long journey, but it was, looking back on it, one that I am, of course, and will be eternally grateful to the Lord for opening my mind to that truth.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. We also have one here from Dr. Egwolf. How much of his time, I would like to know more about the daily routine of Limetra. Would you know how much of his time he spent as a scientist and how much as a priest, balancing between the two things that he did?
Yeah, he was mostly a professor, and you saw in that last photograph that I showed a picture of him lecturing at Louvain. He really spent the majority of his time as a professor lecturing, doing research, working with students. But he also was a very caring individual, and as a Catholic priest, there's a period in his life described in a more recent biography where he was really helping students from China who had come to Louvain and Brussels to accommodate themselves. So that kindness and Christian charity, if you will, clearly came through. But he also had this role as the president of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences and prelate of the papal household. And so he did, obviously pursue those aspects of his life. He did travel after World War II. He actually traveled with Hoyle and his wife after a meeting on a small vacation through the Italian Alps, despite their entirely opposing views. Hoyle, the atheist, Limetra, the Catholic priest, they traveled together. So he was very much, I would say, the professor, and that was really how he lived most of his life, and did it with kindness and generosity, and of course, great distinction.
In relation to this one, Secretary de la Peña clarifies, was Limetra a secular priest?
Yes, he was.
All right. Thank you very much. We also have another one from from Associate Professor Angelina Silverio. The fate of the universe lies on two things: dark energy and gravitational force. The dark energy causes the universe to expand, while gravitational force tries to pull everything back together. Is there a possibility of a big rip or a big crunch?
Well, thank you for that question. That is the big question. What is the fate of the universe? And so up until the last year or so, almost all of the papers written about the expansion of the universe, based on the observations, which are observations essentially of ever more precise determinations of the distance to objects and their recession velocity. And as a function of distance, you can see the effect of dark energy has become more and more important as we get closer and closer to the present day. And you can read that record going back in time simply by going out to more and more distant objects. What that record tells us is that the expansion will not stop, that dark energy, because it does not dilute as space expands, it remains essentially the same intensity, will become more and more important. But the the observations suggest that we're not going to see what's often called the big rip anytime in the future that can be modeled, in the sense that if dark energy were strong enough, you could imagine it would start to actually not only rip galaxies apart, but rip electrons from the nuclei of atoms and rip the protons and neutrons apart to form quarks. That's the big rip. The data suggests that that is not actually going to happen, at least not for an extraordinarily long time. Now, there was one paper very recently that actually argued that the data allowed for even the possibility of things stopping and going back toward the big crunch. We actually read that paper in Journal Club in my department, and there's a lot of skepticism about it. So I mention it only because it illustrates that the data remain uncertain enough and with enough of an error bar, if you will, that we really can't tell the fate of the universe yet. But I think that increasingly precise observations, new satellites to measure the nature of dark energy and better refined distances will probably narrow this down in the next 10 years, and we'll know the answer better.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. We also have, if it's okay, to address two more questions. Is that okay with you, Jonathan?
I'm happy to do that. Yes, absolutely.
The first one, what is the limit of science, in particular physics and astronomy, in answering the end and the beginning of the universe? What do we not know yet in science?
Well, those are two different questions. So let me answer the second one first. It's always dangerous to say what we don't know relative to what we do know. I think it's fair to say that science is always an adventure in which the things that we think we know today are not necessarily what we're going to know tomorrow. Back in the 19th century, 18th century, the universe was thought to be a giant mechanical clock that ran according to Newtonian physics. And the discoveries and the insights of the late 19th and early 20th century in both general relativity and quantum mechanics demolished that view of reality. Our universe is not a deterministic clock, number one. Number two, the question of whether our universe has the particular properties for life that are quite favorable, whether that implies that there was a design to it, or instead that our universe is one of innumerable other universes that make up an even larger space of reality called the multiverse. That is unknown, and that may be on the boundary between science, let's say physics or cosmology, and philosophy or metaphysics. And the reason for that is that if those universes are not in what we would call causal contact with each other and don't have the same physical laws, or might even be the result of a bifurcation every time a quantum event occurs, a wave function collapse. This is the many worlds hypothesis. Then we simply don't have access to those other universes or to the whole fabric of the multiverse. And at that point, what we call science is limited. We can only do the science on the things that we can observe and test. Now, I'm not saying that the multiverse is inaccessible. I don't know whether it is, but there's the possibility that it might be. And so the question of accessing other universes, the question of accessing what happened, and I don't want to use the term before the Big Bang, because if time was in fact created at the Big Bang, there is no before. It's like standing at the North Pole and asking what's north of the North Pole. But trying to access that reality that precedes in some way the Big Bang, depending on what that actually means, that too may not be accessible to us. It might be, but it might not be. And I would say that these are the kinds of problems where it may well be that the cosmologists and the physicists, not of the next decade, but the next century or two, will be wrestling with these problems long after we're gone.
All right, thank you very much for that, Jonathan. I think we also have a question from Dean Ray himself. Can you expound more on how Stephen Hawking viewed and agreed with the concepts of Limetra?
Sure. Well, I mean, Hawking was one of the few scientists who actually acknowledged some of Limetra's contributions in Hawking's own books, which was good because Limetra was basically forgotten in the 70s and 80s and 90s. Now that's interesting because Hawking, of course, died as a passionate atheist who felt that the findings of modern cosmology provided no room for God. When you read his reasons for it, you realize that Hawking didn't really understand what the concept of God is that we hold as Catholics and as Christians. Put another way, the God that Stephen Hawking didn't believe in is not the God that I believe in either. Hawking thought of God as a sort of a super being within the universe or within space and time, rather than being pure act or pure being itself. And we, of course, as material creatures, only participate in being. We are not being itself. So that's an aside, but Hawking took the Big Bang model and made some very interesting explorations. He explored the idea of kind of going back to Eddington, of a sort of an asymptotic universe where you never actually reach the beginning of the expansion. You reach a kind of a singularity. He developed the mathematics for that. And of course, he also pioneered a tremendous amount of work on black holes, not explicitly acknowledging Limetra's contribution to resolving the Schwarzschild singularity problem. But once that was done, Hawking, who was then a generation or two later, was able to of course build on that and do his famous work on rotating black holes and black hole entropy and black hole evaporation. So, I mean, every cosmologist and black hole physicist, Hawking included, in some way builds on the work that Lemaitre did in the 20s and 30s.
Thank you very much for that. Also, Jonathan, we have another question from Associate Professor Silverio. Your take on the relationship between the Big Bang and Genesis, please.
Sure. So I don't think there is one. I stand with Lemaitre on this, that the book of Genesis and the creation story in Genesis is inspired by God and is the story of how God creates a universe that is good, in fact, is very good, and has order to it. Those who wrote this down knew of what we would call Babylonian cosmology at the time that this was written, perhaps in the 6th or 7th century BC. They didn't know about modern cosmology. So, where there are resemblances like the separation of light from darkness, those resemblances should not be taken to mean that there are hints of the Big Bang model in the book of Genesis. Lemaitre comes right out about this. He says that, he put it this way, he said that if St. Paul or Moses had needed to know the theory of general relativity in order to write down what was important, which is the salvation history of humankind, then they would have been given that knowledge, but they didn't need that. They only needed to know the natural world of their time. And so as a consequence, Lemaitre cautions us not to try to read the Bible as a science textbook. The Bible is the salvation history of humankind and the development as we know it is, and I'm preaching to the choir here, the story of the history of humankind's developing relationship with God who finally came to earth in the person of Jesus Christ. That's what's important about the Bible. And Genesis tells us that God created something that was ordered and good, and in which we play an important and pivotal role.
All right. And as possibly a rejoinder to all of these discussions we've been having, you mentioned the phrase, they worked with what available knowledge they had in the natural world they lived in. Moving
Yes.
to 2021, we're right now, I'm looking at Facebook Live. We still have around over 600, people viewing this live, apart from close to 300 here in the Zoom chat, or in our Zoom meeting. As the College of Science prepares for the Centennial, what's the biggest challenge or concern that educators should address informing young Catholic scientists, grounded on their Catholic faith, despite the realities of increased secularism and a tendency to forget God's hand in science? Your take on this, please.
Well, the first important message that all educators should give such young scientists is that not only do you not need to give up your faith in order to do science, but to give up that faith is, beyond the danger to one's own immortal soul, is a way of closing off the part of our human spirit that appreciates the implications of that science. And I'm thinking now in particular of my science, astronomy, that the wonders of creation are things that we learn about through science, but we appreciate through our faith. And so it's not a question of holding on to one's faith. It's a question of that faith being a gift by which we more deeply appreciate the discoveries that are being made through science. And so I think that's very important for young people to understand. And, models of like Limetra, like the Vatican astronomers, the great geophysicist James McIlwain, who was a Jesuit priest and was the president of the American Geophysical Union, a giant secular organization of geophysicists. All of these people had wonderful, successful careers in science and had this beautiful faith in God that provided that extra dimension to their existence. And so don't give it up. It's a beautiful gift, and it will enhance the appreciation of the science that you do as scientists.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. And I'm sure our audience members, both here in Zoom and Facebook Live, agree that this is indeed not just a lecture that gave us, a lot of knowledge, but also even enriched our faith. At this point in time, the University of Santo Tomas College of Science would like to express its appreciation to Professor Lunin with the awarding of the certificate. The citation reads, the University of Santo Tomas College of Science awards the Certificate of Appreciation to Professor Jonathan I. Lunin, PhD, for being the keynote speaker for the inaugural Albertus Magnus Faith and Science lecture entitled Faith and the Expanding Universe of Georges Lemaitre during the College of Science Week 2021, MEOWS 2.0, with the theme Science Works, Securing the Future with Science, held from March 8 to 12, 2021. Signed, Assistant Professor Alan Rodel M. Salcedo, PhD, the overall chairperson of the College of Science Week 2021. Our Dean, Professor Ray Don S. Papa, PhD, and our Father Regent, Reverend Father Louis R. Coronel, HEL, of the Order of Preachers. The Galing Science community, we express our appreciation to Professor Lunin.
Thank you very, very much. I'm very grateful. Thank you for the opportunity to give this lecture.
As we continue with our MEOWS 2.0, while we are actually wrapping up our opening ceremonies, that is by no means indicating that we are cutting short the much anticipated week that we will have. Let us now take a look at this video presentation to see what's in store for us in MEOWS 2.0.
At the turn of the 21st century, the first draft of the Human Genome Project was published. 9 years later, the first self-replicating synthetic bacterial cells are constructed. As we scan the history of scientific milestones, one is awed by the scope and depth of the human intelligence. And apparently, for most of us, only 10% of our brain is actively used. Just imagine what would it be like if we use even half of our brain power. Perhaps one of the most important breakthroughs of the past century was the discovery of the enzyme lysozyme by Sir Alexander Fleming, and the world's first broadly effective antibiotic, which he named penicillin. After experiencing a historically challenging 2020, we are now looking forward to finally overcoming the pandemic caused by COVID-19. With the ongoing rollout of vaccines throughout the world, the importance of science and research is being highlighted.
We celebrate the excellence in science education and research in the UST College of Science. The college has been awarded the highest accreditation of PACOCOA Level 4, the first in the University of Santo Tomas. In recent years, the Commission on Higher Education has recognized majority of its departments as centers of excellence. We believe that just like St. Albert the Great, our patron, with our expertise, we remain in faith as we encourage each other towards excellence, per scientiam ad dominum. May we serve as catalysts for the advancement of science in all areas of our lives.
Our celebrations for this year's Science Week is back to its more usual schedule of being held in early March. But now, it is the second time that we will be holding it under the MEOWS banner. The MEOWS, or Modified Enhanced Online Week of Science, was first held from July 6 to 10, 2020, when the entire Philippines was still placed under stricter community quarantine measures. Its name has been inspired by the novel acronyms that have suddenly played a big role in making sure that the surge in infection rates in the country did not soar beyond unmanageable numbers.
Our mission is to connect science and society, which in turn creates innovation that helps us live a better life.
The fact that we are still holding Science Week as Modified Enhanced Online Week of Science just goes to show how we have not yet been able to fully conquer the pandemic. However, the first MEOWS, as well as this year's second iteration of it, are reminders of how science has played a big role in ensuring that we eventually bring an end to this pandemic.
Through our contributions to science, big or small, we can definitely have a better future.
And we take a glance of our present challenges, and as we take a peek of our future endeavors, we remember, we celebrate, we believe.
Our theme, Science Works, Securing the Future with Science, clearly puts science front and center in any and all initiatives to learn more about the virus, find an effective solution, and develop initiatives to ensure that we will be able to survive this and other future pandemics, as well as other pressing problems facing humanity and our entire planet. Furthermore, this Science Week is the official start to our 5-year countdown to the celebrations leading up to the Centennial of the UST College of Science. The opening ceremonies for this year's Science Week includes the inaugural Albertus Magnus Faith and Science Lectures, which this year will be delivered by Professor Jonathan Lunin of Cornell University. This lecture, which will be held annually from this point onwards, will highlight the importance of appreciating the common bonds between faith and science.
Scientist communities need to actively engage in shaping and promoting evidence-based worldviews. In doing so, we see synergies between free and responsible science and religion. Religion harvests the collective experience of populations about rules of moral conduct. Science and religion are complementary.
We are also very fortunate to have with us today the Honorable Fortunato de la Peña, Secretary of the Department of Science and Technology. Mr. Secretary, we in the UST College of Science are one with the initiatives and efforts of the DOST to bring science into the forefront of the national psyche and to help our countrymen better understand and appreciate the role of science, whether it be fundamental or applied, in a vibrant economy and a stable democracy.
The Galing Science legacy continues to live on. To our students, faculty, and alumni,
we invite you to witness greatness as we celebrate the College of Science Week this March 8 to 12, 2021, with the theme
Science Works, Securing the Future with Science.
To our dear alumni, administrators, and students,
we are inviting you as we celebrate
the 95th founding anniversary of the UST College of Science,
entitled Modified Enhanced Online Week of Science 2.0,
with the theme Science Works, Securing the Future with Science.
We hope to celebrate this momentous event together with all of you. See you this coming March 8 to 12, 2021. See you all!
I would like to thank the organizers of MEOWS 2.0, headed by Drs. Alan Salcedo and Karen Trinidad, all the members of the steering committee, my fellow college administrators, academic staff, support staff, student leaders, and students, as well as our alumni, for making the Modified Enhanced Online Week of Science 2.0 a possibility. With faith and science, we will all see an end to
There you have it, the lineup for this week's MEOWS 2.0. We hope that despite the limitations brought about, by the prohibitions on physical movement, these virtual events that are being organized by the different members of the College of Science family will be attended by all of you. And several of these activities will actually be streamed via Facebook Live so that we can bring the learning not just within the College of Science family, but even beyond. Okay? We'd also like to take this opportunity to remind everyone to not forget that, as announced by Dean Papa earlier, we are opening the logo and theme making contest for the Centennial Celebration of the College of Science. And though the Centennial Celebration is actually 5 years away, the logo and the theme are due for submission of entries by June the 30th of this year. Also, later this afternoon, we'd like to inform you that the first of our webinar series will take place. This installment, organized by the Faculty Association of the College of Science, will feature talks about saving and building one's future and publication procedures for learning materials of the University of Santo Tomas. Also, before we end our opening ceremonies, we'd like to know your thoughts regarding the conduct of our opening ceremony. So please don't forget to fill out the evaluation form, which you can access using the QR code flashed on the screen or via the link. We'll also be placing this link on the chat box for faster access. And now, we formally close the opening ceremonies with the singing of the hymn of the Pontifical and Royal University of Santo Tomas.